My son stood in my living room with a real estate agent behind him, a notary at my dining table, and two movers already waiting by the front door. That was when I realized he had not come to visit his grieving mother. He had come to remove me. Daniel looked around the room as if he were inspecting a property he had already purchased. His wife, Claire, stood beside the fireplace, running one manicured finger across the old mantel my husband had built with his own hands 38 years ago. "This place needs work," she said, wrinkling her nose. "But once we clear out all this old furniture, it'll show much better." Old furniture. She meant my wedding table, my husband's chair, the bookshelf where our son's baby pictures still sat in silver frames. I was sitting in Thomas's favorite armchair, wrapped in the gray cardigan he used to tease me for wearing every winter. He had been gone only 23 days. The scent of his aftershave still clung faintly to the collar of the coat hanging by the hallway door. Daniel placed a thick folder on the coffee table in front of me. "Mom," he said, using that careful voice people use when they want to sound kind while doing something cruel, "it's time to stop fighting reality." I looked at the folder but did not touch it. "What reality is that, Daniel?" His jaw tightened. Claire gave him a look, the kind of silent command I had seen too many times before. Daniel straightened his shoulders. "The house is mine," he said. "Dad promised it to me. You know he did. You're just making this harder than it has to be." The notary shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The real estate agent looked down at his tablet. Even the movers stopped whispering. I looked at my only child, the boy I had carried through fever nights, school failures, and every broken promise he had ever made to himself. Then I asked quietly, "Your father promised you my house?" Daniel's face flushed. It was his house first. Claire stepped forward and slid a gold pen across the table. "Just sign the transfer papers, Margaret. Daniel has already arranged a senior living apartment for you. It's clean, safe, and appropriate for someone your age." For a moment, the room went perfectly still. I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I could hear my own breath. I could hear Thomas's voice in my memory, calm and steady, saying the same thing he had written on a note years before he died. "Meg, if anything ever happens, call Victor before you sign anything." So I smiled. Not because I was happy, because my lawyer was already on his way. Daniel mistook my silence for weakness. "You're done here, Mom," he said. "This house belongs to me now." 3 seconds later, the doorbell rang. Attorney Victor Hayes walked into my living room carrying a sealed envelope from the county recorder's office. He placed it directly on top of Daniel's papers and looked my son dead in the eyes. "Actually," Victor said, "the deed says something very different." Daniel laughed once. Then Victor opened the envelope, and by the time he read the signature at the bottom, my son's face had gone completely white. 10 days before my son stood in my living room and told me the house was his, I was still learning how to breathe without my husband in the room. Thomas had been gone for 13 days. People always say a house feels empty after a funeral, but they never explain what kind of empty. It was not just silence. Silence I could handle. After 41 years of marriage, Thomas and I had shared plenty of quiet mornings together. This was different. This silence had weight. It sat across from me at breakfast. It followed me down the hallway. It waited for me in our bedroom, on his side of the bed, where the pillow still held the faint shape of his head. Every morning, I made coffee for 2 out of habit. Every morning, I poured 1 cup down the sink. That Tuesday, I stood in the kitchen with my hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone cold. Outside the window, the maple tree Thomas planted when Daniel was born had started turning orange at the edges. Thomas used to say that tree grew exactly like our son, too fast, crooked in places, but still ours. I wanted to believe that. The doorbell rang at 9:17 a.m. I remember the exact time because I had been staring at the clock above the stove, trying to convince myself to open the stack of sympathy cards on the counter. When I opened the front door, Daniel was standing there with Claire beside him. My son wore a navy coat and a careful expression. Claire wore cream-colored slacks, pearl earrings, and the impatient look of a woman who believed grief was something other people used as an excuse to move slowly. "Mom," Daniel said, leaning in to kiss my cheek, "how are you holding up?" It was the right question. But his eyes were not on my face. They were moving past me into the foyer, across the staircase, toward the rooms behind me. Claire gave me a brief hug that barely touched my shoulders. "We brought breakfast," she said, holding up a paper bag from an expensive bakery downtown. "You need to eat something." I stepped aside and let them in. Daniel walked into the house like a visitor trying to look respectful. Claire walked in like a buyer trying not to seem too eager. She paused beside the living room archway and looked up at the crown molding. "This place has good bones," she said. I turned slowly. Good bones. Not beautiful memories. Not your home. Not "Dad loved this room." Good bones. Daniel cleared his throat. "Claire means the house is still in good condition." "I know what she means," I said. He looked uncomfortable for half a second, then gave me the soft smile he used whenever he wanted to guide me toward something I did not want. "Mom, we've been thinking." I carried the bakery bag into the kitchen. "That sounds serious." Claire sat at the island without being invited. She crossed one leg over the other and placed her designer purse on the stool beside her, right where Thomas used to sit and peel apples with a pocket knife. Daniel remained standing. "You shouldn't be alone here," he said. "This house is too much for one person." I opened a cabinet and took down 3 plates. "I've lived in this house for 38 years, Daniel." "That's exactly the point," Claire said gently, though there was nothing gentle in her eyes. "It's too much history, too many stairs, too much maintenance. At your age, that can become dangerous very quickly. At my age, I was 67, not 97. I set the plates down a little harder than I meant to. Daniel noticed. "Mom, nobody is attacking you." "Then stop circling me like I'm already on the floor." His face tightened. Claire gave a small sigh, the kind rich women use when a waiter brings the wrong wine. "Margaret, this is not emotional. This is practical." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. To Claire, my husband's chair was practical. My wedding china was practical. The garden Thomas watered every Sunday morning was practical. The height marks Daniel had carved into the pantry door as a child were practical. My life had become square footage. Daniel reached across the counter and touched my hand. "Dad would want you taken care of," he said. I looked down at his fingers. When he was little, those same hands used to cling to my skirt whenever thunder shook the windows. I used to kneel beside his bed and promise him nothing bad would happen while I was there. Now he was using that same soft voice to push me out of my own home. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Daniel glanced at Claire. She answered for him. "There's a senior living community 20 minutes from us, very clean, very safe. Daniel and I toured it last week." "Last week?" I repeated. "Thomas had been dead 6 days last week." Daniel looked away. Claire continued, "We can help you transition before winter, then Daniel can start handling the house." I stared at her. "Handling it?" Daniel finally found his voice. "Selling it, Mom, or renting it. We haven't decided yet." The kitchen seemed to shrink around me. I could hear Thomas in my memory, laughing as he painted the cabinets blue because I said white felt too cold. I could see him standing barefoot by the back door, holding our newborn son and whispering, "We did it, Meg. We finally have a home. Not a property. A home." I folded my hands together on the counter so Daniel would not see them shake. "And when did you decide this house needed to be handled?" Daniel's eyes hardened just enough for me to see the man beneath the sun. "After Dad died," he said. "Somebody had to start thinking clearly." I nodded once, not because I agreed, because at that moment I understood that my mourning period was over. Theirs had never begun. By the next afternoon, Daniel stopped pretending this was about concern. He arrived at my house at 2 p.m. sharp, carrying a leather folder under one arm and wearing the same tight expression Thomas used to call his business face. Claire followed him in without waiting for me to invite her. She had a tablet in her hand, her sunglasses pushed up on top of her perfectly styled blonde hair, and the brisk confidence of someone who had already made decisions about a life that did not belong to her. I was in the dining room sorting through sympathy cards. Some were from neighbors. Some were from Thomas's old coworkers. One was from Mrs. Bell, the woman across the street, who had written, "I had just pressed that card to my chest when Daniel placed his leather folder directly on top of the pile." "We need to talk seriously," he said. I looked at the folder. That seems to be what everyone says before asking for something they know they shouldn't. His mouth tightened. Claire pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Margaret, this attitude is exactly why Daniel is worried. What attitude? The resistance, she said smoothly. The suspicion, the emotional attachment to things that are no longer practical. I looked around the dining room. Thomas and I had eaten our first Thanksgiving dinner in this room on a folding card table because we could not afford proper furniture yet. Daniel had done his homework at that window. Thomas had danced with me right here on our 30th anniversary while the radio played too softly in the kitchen. Claire saw old walls. I saw a life. Daniel opened the folder and pulled out several documents clipped together with a silver binder clip. "This is just paperwork," he said. Nothing dramatic. I did not reach for it. "What kind of paperwork?" "A financial power of attorney," he said. "Temporary, just so I can help manage things while you recover." "Recover from what?" He blinked. "Mom, Dad just died." "I know, I was there." Claire exhaled sharply through her nose. Daniel leaned forward. "You're grieving. You're overwhelmed. Nobody is saying you're incapable forever. But right now you are not in the right state of mind to handle taxes, insurance, maintenance, legal filings. I handled all of that while your father was alive. That was different. Why? Because Dad was here." There it was, the small, ugly truth sitting between us like a crack in the floor. I picked up the first page and began reading. Daniel shifted in his chair almost immediately. "You don't have to read every line right now." "Yes," I said, "I do." The document looked innocent at first, bills, banking, medical forms. But halfway down the second page, the language changed. It gave Daniel authority to manage, lease, transfer, or sell real property in my name. I read the line twice. Then I looked up. "If this is only to help me pay bills, why do you need the right to sell my house?" Daniel's face flushed. "Because emergencies happen." "What emergency requires selling the roof over my head?" Claire placed both hands on the table. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light. "Margaret, you are making this personal when it is financial. It became personal when you brought papers into my dining room 13 days after I buried my husband." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. "Do you think this is easy for me?" he snapped. "Do you think I enjoy watching you sit here surrounded by dust and old memories, acting like Dad is going to walk back through the door?" For a moment, I could not speak. Not because his words surprised me, because they landed exactly where he meant them to. Claire softened her voice. "Daniel has been under enormous pressure. You know his investment project has had setbacks." I turned to her. "Setbacks?" Daniel rubbed his forehead. Claire answered before he could stop her. "The development deal in Columbus. There were delays, legal fees, penalties. It's temporary, but Daniel needs liquidity." Liquidity. That was what my home had become. Not shelter, not memory. Not the place where Thomas took his final careful steps from the hospital bed to the window because he wanted to see the maple tree one last time. Liquidity. "How much?" I asked. Daniel looked away. Claire's lips pressed together. $280,000. The room went quiet. I stared at my son, waiting for shame to appear on his face. Instead, he looked angry. "I was going to pay it back after the sale," he said. "This house is part of the family estate. It makes sense to use it before everything collapses." "Everything?" I asked softly. "Or you?" He slammed his palm on the table. "Dad would have helped me." I stood slowly. "Your father would have asked why you hid it." Daniel's eyes went hard. "Don't use him against me. Then stop using him against me." Claire rose from her chair, her calm mask beginning to crack. "This is exactly why the paperwork matters. You are too emotional to make rational choices." Daniel pushed the gold pen toward me. "Sign it, Mom. Let me fix this before it gets worse." I looked at the pen, then at the documents, then at the sympathy cards trapped underneath them. "No." Daniel stared at me as if the word had physically struck him. "No?" he repeated. "No." His voice dropped low. "You're forcing my hand." I folded the documents neatly and slid them back across the table. "No, Daniel," I said. "You brought your hand into my house and asked me to sign it." He grabbed the folder so hard the papers bent. Claire walked to the doorway, then turned back with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Think carefully, Margaret," she said. "Old women who fight their families usually end up very alone." After they left, I sat in the dining room until the light faded. Then I went upstairs to Thomas's study. His desk still smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco. I opened the bottom drawer, looking for the small brass key to our fireproof lockbox. It was gone. My heart began to pound. I searched the drawer again, slower this time, and found a folded note tucked beneath an old insurance envelope. Thomas's handwriting shook across the page. I sat there in the dark, holding that note with both hands, and for the first time since the funeral, I did not feel broken. I felt warned. Victor Hayes's office was on the 4th floor of an old brick building downtown, wedged between a tax accountant and a dentist who had retired twice and somehow kept coming back. Thomas used to joke that Victor's office smelled like 3 things: old paper, strong coffee, and secrets. He had been right. When I stepped inside the next morning, the receptionist looked up from her desk and softened the moment she recognized me. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently. "I'm so sorry about Mr. Thomas." I thanked her, though the words felt automatic now. People were always sorry. They just never knew what to do with the sorrow after handing it to you. Victor came out himself. He was 74, tall, narrow-shouldered, and still wore the same dark suspenders he had worn when Thomas and I signed our first mortgage documents almost 4 decades earlier. His hair had gone completely white, but his eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "Margaret," he said. That was all. No dramatic sympathy, no pitying tilt of the head, no careful funeral voice, just my name. Somehow, that made me almost cry. He led me into his office and closed the door. I sat across from his desk, clutching Thomas's folded note in my purse like it was a lifeline. Victor did not rush me. That was one of the things I had always liked about him. He understood that silence was not empty. Sometimes silence was where people gathered enough strength to speak. I placed Daniel's documents on his desk first, then I placed Thomas's note beside them. Victor read the note slowly. His expression did not change, but something hardened behind his eyes. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about Daniel and Claire touring a senior living community before Thomas's flowers had even wilted. I told him about the power of attorney, the clause allowing Daniel to sell the house, the missing lockbox key, the way Claire had said old women who fought their families ended up alone. Victor listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and set them neatly on the desk. "Margaret," he said, "did Thomas ever tell you why he insisted we update the property deed in 2009? I blinked. "Only that it had something to do with protecting the house." Victor nodded once, stood, and walked to the row of locked filing cabinets behind his desk. He opened the 3rd drawer from the bottom and removed a thick blue folder with my name written across the tab in Thomas's handwriting. My stomach tightened. Victor returned to his chair and laid the folder in front of me as carefully as a doctor placing an X-ray on a light board. "In 2009, he said, Thomas was facing potential liability from that failed trucking partnership with Raymond Keller." I remembered the name. Raymond had been Thomas's friend, then his partner, then the reason Thomas stopped trusting men who smiled too easily. "There was a possibility creditors might come after jointly held assets," Victor continued. "Thomas wanted to protect the house, but that was only part of it." He opened the folder and slid the first document toward me. It was a recorded warranty deed. My eyes moved down the page, over legal descriptions and parcel numbers until they landed on the line that made the room go still. "Sole owner." I stared at it. Victor spoke quietly. "Thomas transferred his full ownership interest in the property to you 17 years ago." My mouth went dry. "What?" "He signed it willingly. It was notarized, recorded with the county, and never challenged." I touched the edge of the paper, afraid somehow that if I pressed too hard it would disappear. "But Daniel said his father promised him the house." Victor's mouth tightened. Thomas could not promise Daniel something he no longer owned. The words hit with a force I did not expect. For days, Daniel had stood in my kitchen and dining room talking about the house like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Claire had looked at my walls, my furniture, my memories, and seen future profit. And all along, Thomas had already made sure they could not touch it. Victor slid another page across the desk. "This is the mortgage satisfaction record. The final payoff came from your separate inheritance account after your mother passed." I remembered that money. I remembered arguing with Thomas about it. He had said we should save it. I had said I was tired of living under a bank's thumb. I had written the check myself. Victor leaned back. Legally, Margaret, this house is yours. Not half yours. Not conditionally yours. Yours. For the first time in 2 weeks, I breathed all the way in. Then Victor opened a smaller envelope from inside the folder. Thomas also left this with me. My hands trembled when I saw my name on the front. Meg. Victor did not read it. He simply handed it to me. I opened the envelope slowly. Thomas's handwriting slanted across the page, weaker than it used to be, but still unmistakably his. My vision blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest and finally let the tears come. Victor waited. When I could speak again, I whispered he knew. Victor's voice was low. He worried. I looked at Daniel's documents still sitting on the desk. What are these really? Victor put his glasses back on and began reading them carefully. The room changed as he turned each page. His calm expression sharpened into something colder. This is not just a power of attorney, he said. I felt my hands go still. What is it? It gives Daniel authority to sell, transfer, or encumber your real property without further consent. It also contains an indemnity clause protecting him from liability if the property is sold below market value. He turned another page. And this section allows Claire's affiliated consulting company to receive fees from the transaction. The grief inside me folded itself into something harder. So they weren't trying to help me. Victor closed the folder. No, Margaret. They were trying to get you to sign away your house before you realized it was already yours. I looked down at Thomas's letter. For 13 days I had felt like a widow being slowly erased. Now I felt something else. Not peace. Not yet, but direction. Victor placed the deed, the mortgage record, and Thomas's letter into a fresh envelope. Take these home, he said. Make copies. Keep the originals safe. And Margaret, I looked up. If Daniel comes back with more papers, do not raise your voice. Do not threaten him. Let him talk. Why? Victor's eyes narrowed. Because greedy people always reveal more when they believe they have already won. That evening, Daniel called. His voice was clipped and impatient. We're coming tomorrow with a notary. This ends then. I looked at the sealed envelope on my kitchen table. Then I looked at Thomas's empty chair. All right, I said softly. Bring your lawyer, too. The next morning I woke before sunrise and made coffee for one. For the first time since Thomas died, I did not pour a second cup out of habit. I took my mug to the kitchen table, placed Victor's sealed envelope beside it, and watched the pale November light creep slowly across the floor. At 8:42 a.m., Daniel texted me. I read the message twice. Then I set my phone face down. Reasonable. That was the word people used when they wanted you to surrender quietly. By 9:55, I had changed into a navy dress Thomas always said made me look too elegant for this old house. I pinned my silver hair back, put on my wedding ring, and slipped my phone into the pocket of my cardigan with the voice recorder already open. Victor's advice echoed in my mind. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing on the porch with Claire at his side, but they were not alone. Behind them stood a young attorney in a charcoal suit, a notary carrying a leather briefcase, a real estate agent holding a tablet, and 2 movers in matching gray shirts. One of the movers had already started unfolding a stack of cardboard boxes. I looked at my son. You brought movers? Daniel did not even have the decency to look embarrassed, just to make things easier once the papers are signed. Claire smiled. We didn't want you overwhelmed by packing. How thoughtful, I said. Daniel stepped inside without waiting for permission. Claire followed, her heels clicking across my foyer like she owned every inch of it. The others hesitated until Daniel waved them in. It's fine, he said. This is family property. I closed the door slowly. Family property, not my home. The real estate agent immediately began scanning the living room, making notes on his tablet. Claire pointed toward Thomas's armchair. That can go. It makes the room look smaller. My hand tightened around the edge of my cardigan pocket. Thomas had sat in that chair the night Daniel was born, holding our baby against his chest, whispering that he had never been so terrified of loving anything. The mover stepped toward it. Don't touch that chair, I said. The room went still. Daniel gave a tired sigh, as if I had just proved some point he had been trying to make. Mom, this is exactly what we talked about. You're too emotionally attached to objects. That chair is not an object to me. Claire folded her arms. That's the problem. The young attorney cleared his throat and placed his briefcase on my dining table. Mrs. Whitmore, my name is Kevin Marsh. I represent Daniel in the estate transition. Estate transition, I repeated. Daniel rubbed his face. Mom, please don't start. I walked into the dining room and sat at the head of the table, the same seat Thomas used to insist belonged to me because, as he put it, you run this house better than any chairman runs a boardroom. Kevin opened his folder and arranged the documents neatly. These forms will grant Daniel temporary authority to manage the property, coordinate the sale, and make appropriate residential arrangements for you. I looked at Daniel. And if I do not sign? Claire answered before anyone else could. Then Daniel will petition the court for emergency conservatorship. The notary's pen paused over her journal. Daniel shot Claire a look, but she continued. We have documented concerns about your mental state since Thomas passed. Isolation, emotional instability, irrational refusal to consider safe housing. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked down at my folded hands. Irrational? Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. Mom, you are sitting in a dead man's house pretending nothing has changed. The words struck so sharply that for 1 second I forgot to breathe. A dead man's house. My house. Our house. Claire's voice softened into something poisonous. No one wants to embarrass you, Margaret, but if you force us to bring this before a judge, certain things will have to be said. What things? Daniel looked away. Claire did not. That you forget appointments, that you talk to Thomas as if he's still here, that you refuse help, that you may be vulnerable to financial mistakes. I looked at my son. Is that what you believe? Daniel's jaw moved, but he said nothing. His silence was worse than an answer. The real estate agent shifted uncomfortably near the window. The movers stared at the floor. Even Kevin, the attorney, seemed to realize the room had become something uglier than a property discussion. I let the silence stretch. Then I asked Daniel, very calmly, when did you decide I was no longer capable of living in my own home? His face hardened. When you started choosing a house over your own son. There it was. Not concern, not safety, not grief. Punishment. I nodded slowly. So this is about your debt. His eyes flashed. Claire stepped forward. This is about protecting family assets. No, I said. This is about selling my home to cover Daniel's mistakes. Daniel slammed his hand on the dining table. Dad would have given me this house. I looked at him for a long moment. If your father were standing here, would you say that to his face? His nostrils flared. If he were standing here, he'd tell you to stop clinging to something you didn't earn. The room went silent. Something inside me went very still, not broken, still, like a lake before a storm. I stood and walked to the mantel. Thomas's photograph sat there in a dark wooden frame, his smile caught forever in the easy warmth he had carried through most of his life. I touched the frame lightly. You believe I didn't earn this house? Claire gave a quiet laugh. Margaret, you were a hospital bookkeeper. Let's not rewrite history. I turned back. The recorder in my pocket was still running. Then perhaps, I said, we should let history speak for itself. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Before I could answer, Claire moved close enough that only I could hear her. Old women who fight too hard usually lose everything. I looked directly into her eyes, only when they didn't keep receipts. For the first time that morning, Claire's smile faltered. Then the doorbell rang. Daniel looked irritated. Who is that? I walked past him toward the foyer. My receipts, I said. And when I opened the door, Victor Hayes was standing on my porch with a brown leather briefcase in one hand and a county recorder's envelope in the other. Victor did not step into my house like a man arriving for a family discussion. He stepped in like a man entering a courtroom. The change in the room was immediate. Daniel straightened. Claire's hand dropped from her hip. The young attorney, Kevin Marsh, stood so quickly his chair scraped against the dining room floor. Victor, Daniel said, forcing a smile that looked painful. I didn't know Mom had called you. Victor removed his gloves slowly. That was the first wise decision made in this house all week. Claire's eyes narrowed. This is a private family matter. Victor looked at her over the rim of his glasses. Not anymore. He placed his brown leather briefcase on the dining table, opened it, and removed several folders. Then he turned to the notary. Before anyone signs anything, I suggest you check the identity of the legal property owner. The notary blinked. I was told Mr. Whitmore was handling the estate. My husband is dead, I said quietly, and this house was never part of his estate. Daniel's face changed, only slightly, but I saw it. The small twitch at the corner of his mouth, the quick glance toward Claire, the flicker of fear before anger covered it. Victor placed the recorded deed on the table. In 2009, Thomas Whitmore transferred full ownership of this property to Margaret Ann Whitmore. The deed was notarized, recorded by the county, and has remained valid ever since. Kevin reached for the document and began reading. Daniel laughed once too loudly. That doesn't make sense. Dad would have told me. Victor did not look at him. Your father was not required to report his wife's property rights to you. Claire stepped closer to the table. There must be another document, a later one. There is not, Victor said. Her mouth tightened. Then Kevin's phone buzzed. He glanced down, read something, and his expression shifted from professional caution to genuine alarm. Victor noticed. Something wrong, Mr. Marsh? Kevin looked at Daniel. I need to speak with my client privately. Claire snapped. Not now. But Kevin had already moved toward the hallway. Daniel followed him, his face pale and furious. I stayed seated. Victor sat beside me and lowered his voice. We found something else last night. I looked at him. He slid another folder toward me, this one marked with a red tab. A preliminary electronic filing was submitted to the county recorder's system 3 days ago. A quitclaim deed transferring this property from you to Daniel. The room seemed to tilt. I never signed anything. I know. Victor opened the folder. There it was. My name typed neatly across the top, my supposed signature at the bottom, a notary stamp beside it. My stomach turned cold. At first glance, the signature looked close, but close was not mine. The loop in the M was too tall. The final E in Ann was wrong. Whoever had forged it knew what my signature looked like, but not how my hand moved when I wrote it. Claire stood frozen near the fireplace. Victor looked directly at her. The signature is false. The middle name is misspelled in the electronic metadata. The date stamp places Margaret at a notary office at 11:12 a.m. on Wednesday. I remembered Wednesday. I had been sitting in Victor's office at that exact time, holding Thomas's letter. Victor continued, We also obtained building security footage from my office. Margaret was with me from 10:34 a.m. until 12:08 p.m. Claire's face lost color. Daniel and Kevin returned from the hallway. Daniel looked angry now, but Kevin looked like a man trying to step away from a fire before it spread to his shoes. Daniel, Kevin said carefully, did you submit a quitclaim deed to the county? Daniel's eyes shot to Claire. That was all the answer anyone needed. Claire snapped. It was only a draft. It was never supposed to go through. Victor's voice was calm. A forged deed submitted as a draft is still a forged deed. The notary at the table stood so quickly her pen rolled onto the floor. I was not told any of this, she said. No one was, Victor replied. That was the point. Daniel turned on me then. You did this, Jeff, he said. I looked at my son, the boy I had once taught to tie his shoes, the boy who used to leave sticky fingerprints on every window in this house. No, I said. You did. His voice cracked. I needed help. You could have asked for help. I did ask. No, Daniel. You demanded my home. For one moment, grief moved through his face. Real grief, maybe, or fear wearing grief's clothing. Claire destroyed it. Stop acting like a victim, Margaret, she hissed. This house could save your son. Victor closed the red folder. At $610,000. Claire went still. Daniel turned to her. What? Victor removed another document. The house was appraised last month at $850,000. Yet Claire had already negotiated a private sale to Mercer Development for $610,000. Her consulting company was scheduled to receive a $75,000 fee after closing. Daniel stared at his wife. Claire's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, Daniel looked less like my attacker and more like a fool who had just discovered he was also being used. I should have felt satisfaction. I did not. I felt tired. Victor gathered the documents and placed them in order. The real deed, the forged deed, the appraisal, the private sale agreement, the consulting fee contract. One by one, the truth took shape on my dining table. Not as emotion, as evidence. Kevin stepped back from Daniel. I can no longer advise you to proceed. Claire whispered, Daniel, fix this. But Daniel was staring at the forged signature. My forged signature. His mother's name, stolen by his own hand. I stood slowly. "This meeting is over." Daniel looked up. "Mom, no," I said. "You do not get to call me that while standing over forged papers with my name on them." Victor picked up his briefcase. "We will reconvene Monday morning," he said, "with the county representative, the bank, and the appropriate investigator present." Claire's face hardened again. "You wouldn't dare turn this into a legal case." I looked at her. "You tried to turn my home into a transaction. I am simply returning the favor." That was the moment Claire finally understood. I was not confused. I was not weak, and I was no longer alone. Monday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of November morning that made every window in the house look sharper than it should. I was dressed before 7, not in black. I had worn enough black for Thomas. I chose a deep blue dress, the one he used to say made my eyes look clear, and pinned my wedding ring to a chain beneath my collar. Then I walked through each room slowly, touching nothing, changing nothing, simply reminding myself what Daniel had tried to take. At 9 a.m., the first car pulled into the driveway. Victor arrived with his briefcase. Behind him came a representative from the county recorder's office, a bank officer carrying the old mortgage file, and a quiet man in a gray coat who introduced himself as Investigator Paul Reeves. Daniel and Claire arrived 10 minutes later. Daniel looked exhausted. His tie was crooked. His face carried the gray, hollow look of a man who had not slept. Claire, on the other hand, came dressed like she was attending a business negotiation. Cream coat, pearl earrings, red lipstick. But her eyes moved too quickly. That told me she was afraid. We all sat in the dining room. The same dining room where Thomas and I had eaten soup from mismatched bowls the first winter the furnace broke. The same room where Daniel had once stood on a chair and announced he wanted to be rich enough to buy Mama Castle. Now he sat across from me, trying to steal the only castle I had ever wanted. Victor opened the meeting. "This is a final clarification of ownership, attempted transfer activity, and possible fraud related to 1846 Maple Hollow Road." Claire leaned back. "That sounds unnecessarily dramatic." Investigator Reeves looked at her. "Fraud usually is." The room went silent. Victor placed the original recorded deed in the center of the table. "First, the legal owner of this property is Margaret Ann Whitmore, sole owner, recorded in 2009. The county representative confirmed it with a short nod. There is no current legal interest held by Daniel Whitmore." Daniel stared at the table. Victor placed the mortgage satisfaction document beside it. "Second, the final mortgage payment was made from Margaret's separate inheritance account. The bank confirms the lien was satisfied in full by Mrs. Whitmore." The bank officer opened his file. "That is correct." Claire crossed her arms. "Thomas was her husband. That still makes it family property." Victor's eyes lifted. "Marriage is not a blank check, Mrs. Whitmore." Then he placed Thomas's letter on the table. My breath caught. Victor did not read all of it, only the part that mattered. "If Daniel ever mistakes inheritance for entitlement, remind him that blood does not replace gratitude." Daniel closed his eyes. For a second, I saw the little boy he used to be. The one who cried when Thomas left for long trucking routes. The one who used to ask me if houses could miss people. Then he opened his eyes, and the man sitting across from me was a stranger again. Victor placed the forged quitclaim deed on top of Daniel's folder. Third, a deed transfer was submitted electronically using Margaret's name and a false signature. Claire snapped. "It was never finalized." Investigator Reeves leaned forward. "Submitting a fraudulent property document is not made legal by failing to finish the crime." Daniel's face twisted. "I didn't know Claire had arranged the sale price." Claire turned on him instantly. "Don't you dare put this on me. You were the one who said she would sign if we scared her enough." The words hung in the room like smoke. The county representative stopped writing. Kevin Marsh, Daniel's attorney, stared at his client in disbelief. I looked at Daniel. "You were going to scare your mother out of her home?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Claire, realizing too late what she had said, tried to recover. "This has been emotional for everyone." "No," I said quietly. "Grief was emotional. This was calculated." Victor then placed the private sale agreement and Claire's consulting contract on the table. Fourth, the property was being prepared for sale at $240,000 below appraisal value, with a $75,000 fee scheduled to be paid to Claire's affiliated company. Daniel looked at Claire as if he had finally seen her clearly. You were taking a fee? Claire's lips tightened. I was solving your problem. My problem? He whispered. Yes, she said, her mask cracking completely. Your debt, your failed investment, your mother sitting on an asset while we drowned. I watched my son absorb the truth. Claire had used him, but only because he had offered himself to be used. Daniel turned to me. Mom, he said, voice breaking. I was desperate. I wanted to soften. A mother's heart does not stop being a mother's heart just because it has been wounded. Some part of me still wanted to reach across the table and touch his hand. But then I looked at my forged signature, and I remembered Claire's voice. Old women who fight too hard usually lose everything. No, Daniel, I said. You were entitled. Desperate people ask for help. Entitled people bring movers. He lowered his head. Victor slid one final document toward him. This is a cease and desist order. You and your wife are barred from entering this property without written permission. Any further attempt to transfer, encumber, or market the home will be reported immediately. Investigator Reeves gathered copies of the forged deed. The county will review this with the district attorney. Claire stood so fast her chair hit the wall. You would destroy your own son over a house? I stood too. No, my son tried to destroy me for a house. I am simply refusing to disappear. No one spoke after that. Daniel left without looking back. Claire followed him, but not beside him. 3 steps behind. A month later, I changed my will. Daniel was removed from direct inheritance. A portion of my estate would go into a protected trust he could not touch. The rest would fund a small foundation in Thomas's name, helping elderly homeowners facing financial abuse from their own families. On the first warm morning of spring, I sat on the back porch with coffee in my hands and Thomas's old jacket around my shoulders. The maple tree had begun to bloom. For the first time in months, the house was quiet without feeling empty. I touched the porch rail where Thomas had carved our initials long ago, M+T. Home is where we stay. Daniel had said the house was his, but the deed had my signature, and the truth had finally come home.